Hello and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Dan Moulthrop. I'm the Chief Executive here and a proud member, and it's my honor to welcome all of you here to our debate between two of the three candidates for Ohio Secretary of State. With us today are Democratic Party candidate and State Senator Nina Turner and Libertarian Party candidate and Libertarian Party Chairman Kevin Nedler. The Republican in the race, incumbent Jon Husted, declined our invitation. In fact, his campaign spokesman recently lamented this event would be little more than a forum for, quote, partisan talking points. We may have an opportunity here to prove him wrong. Still, we are pleased that Senator Turner and Mr. Nedler are both here to discuss the important issues facing Ohioans and the office of the Secretary of State. Nina Turner began in politics as a legislative aide in Columbus and later in Cleveland. She was elected to Cleveland City Council in 2005, where she served Ward 1, and became a state senator in 2008. She has represented Cleveland's east side and eastern suburbs since then. Mr. Nedler has been chairman of the Ohio Libertarian Party since 2007. He served on the Libertarian National Committee from 2010 to 2012. He lives in Delaware, Ohio, and is a graduate of The Ohio State University. Here to moderate our debate is Henry Gomez. Henry covers politics for the Northeast Ohio Media Group, providing content for the Plain Dealer and Cleveland.com. Henry, I hand it off to you.
Thanks, Dan. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for being here today. Mr. Nedler, Senator Turner, it's good to see the both of you. I'll first introduce the rules and the format. Both candidates will begin with a 3-minute opening statement. We determine the order by coin toss before, and Senator Turner, she'll go first. Mr. Nedler will go second. After that, we'll go into questions from me. Questions directed to both candidates will receive a 90-second response. Questions to a specific candidate receive a 90-minute response from that candidate and a 30-second rebuttal from the opponent. This format will continue in the second half when we get questions from all of you. Lastly, I will ask a final summative question of both candidates, and they will have 3 minutes each to respond. Throughout the debate, candidates will be notified they have 15 seconds remaining and when their time is up. Assuming everybody is ready, let's begin. Senator Turner, you will go first.
Well, thank you, Henry, and it is such a pleasure to be here at the City Club, the citadel of free speech, and to be here with Mr. Nedler. At least the two of us believe that candidates should face the folks that we want to vote for us, so we are both happy to be here. You know, I want to borrow something from President Lyndon B. Johnson when he said that the vote is the most important instrument ever devised by man for breaking down injustice. And that really is what the Secretary of State's office is all about, to create and expand access to the ballot box, the whole notion of the people, by the people, and for the people. The Secretary of State's office is that bridge, it is that pathway for all of our democracy. And it is beyond unfortunate that we have a current Secretary of State that does not necessarily believe in expanding and protecting access to the ballot box, as we can see by his deeds. He certainly says one thing, but he does another. As a daughter of the city of Cleveland, a former Cleveland City Councilwoman and a state senator, I understand how vitally important it is to give all folks that access to the ballot box that they need and deserve so that they can create a vision for their community, this great state, and this great nation through the power of the vote. When it comes to shaping that community, those who represent, it is important, and the democracy is better when people are in it. For me, being Secretary of State means making sure voting is simple, is accessible, and it is secure, and also creating pathways of opportunities for businesses to be that bridge for voters, to be that bridge for businesses, and to be that bridge beyond. The voters of the great state of Ohio deserve better than what they are getting right now. And there's an app for all that ails us, and it is called The Vote. And I am here to answer the call to become the next Secretary of State of the great state of Ohio. And it doesn't matter to me how people want to vote. They can be a little red, a little blue, a little purple, another color. They can be country, rock and roll, or R&B. I just want folks to be able to vote. That is what the voters of this state deserve, and I plan to give that to them. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation to participate today. There's a long tradition with the City Club in Cleveland, and I'm glad to be here. I think that obviously Senator Turner and I both take it very seriously and respect that fact. I'm running for Secretary of State because I'm troubled by the constant posturing for political gain at the expense of the citizens of Ohio. As Secretary of State, I'm going to encourage a culture of inclusion, not exclusion. And what that means is there's a goal of having more voter participation and more voter freedom or suffrage. I'll have an open door policy to the citizens of Ohio with their issues. One of the first things I'm going to do is bring back the Voting Rights Institute that I was a member of in 2009 and 2010 under Secretary Brunner's office. It's funny, it went away in 2011. Think about that. Because after all, it's high time we started working out these issues in meeting rooms instead of courtrooms. And believe me, I've been in way too many courtrooms. Free and fair elections mean multiple choices. Choices of convenient times and places where you can vote. Multiple choices of candidates and parties on the ballot. And a convenience of how and when you register to vote, including online. I'm going to open up the Board of Elections. I'm going to push the Ohio Assembly. They are exclusive to Democrats and Republicans, the Board of Elections. That's not right. When 50% of the people in Ohio are not affiliated with either major party, where is their voice at the local county Board of Elections? And I have a plan to fix that. Reversing these trends, we can do it. The apathy can go away, the frustration can go away, but we have a lot of work to do. This didn't all happen for me overnight. I developed these ideas over years of working in business in my formative years in Union County, Ohio, where I was born. Central Ohio. I grew up in Union County, the son of a United States Air Force military man and an immigrant mother from Europe who clearly remembers World War II and the Blitz. Believe me, she's told me stories. I was shaped by the actions and the things I saw in the 50s and especially the turbulent 60s. I remember it. I saw it on TV, you name it, early 70s. All these things not only shaped me, but it shaped our nation and it shaped our state. Working-wise, I've worked for 42 years with my employer, and I started out with nothing at the bottom rung, and through persistence, I moved myself up, and it wasn't easy, but for 30 years, I called on national accounts and sales, and I dealt with millions of dollars of business that required meticulous attention to detail and organization. As far as the party, I joined the party in 2007, became chairman, joined the national committee. But during that time, I have fought multiple lawsuit court battles over freedom to vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As Dan mentioned in the intro, Secretary Husted refused to be here, but if he were, I imagine he would have opened by saying that under his watch, it's easier to vote in Ohio and it's harder to cheat. So why don't we start with that? I want to ask both of you, do you agree that Secretary Husted has achieved those two measures, and how would you expound upon that? Senator Turner, let's start with you.
Well, you know, Mr. Husted says one thing, but he does another. You cannot necessarily say that you have made it easy to vote when you appeal all the way to the United States Supreme Court just in this particular election. And the court ruled on his stay, granted him his stay 16 hours before early voting was supposed to start on September the 30th. You can't say that you're making it easy to vote when in 2012 you appealed all the way to the United States Supreme Court to take away the last 3 days of early voting. You can't say that you're making it easy to vote when boards of elections in 2012 were mailing out absentee ballot applications. He put out a directive to stop it. So he is not making it easy to vote. He says those words off his lips, but his actions, you know, Scripture says you would know the tree by the fruit that it bears, and Mr. Husted bears a lot of rotten fruit. We need to have a Secretary of State that believes in expanding and protecting the right to the ballot box, which is the greatest equalizer that we have. It is just that simple, that elections should be simple, they should be accessible, and they should be secure. And we can have all of that at the same time. Our democracy is better the more people who participate in it, and that is why I'm running. I'm going to be cheerleader in chief, reminding folks that every single year there's an issue or a person on the ballot that will have an impact on their lives, and that you cannot sit on the sidelines. In a democracy, you must participate.
Mr. Nedler?
as Secretary of State, you better believe I'm going to be on the bully pulpit for freedom. Because we lose freedom in this country. We lose the right to vote, the First Amendment. We better hope we still have the second one. There is nothing more sacred than the right to vote. It's a key pillar of our society. We fought the largest standing army and the standing navy hundreds of years ago, that would be Britain, to get freedom, and we're losing it in Ohio. I want to point out, though, the bag of tricks from the Republican Party. SB 193, basically eliminating minor political parties. They dropped that, I won't use that adjective. They dropped that on us in September, and then they appealed it, and you know, the Republicans, they just can't help themselves. They just love to appeal, to thwart and suppress voters and minor parties and whoever else doesn't think like them. And then the 1 week removed for Golden Week. Add that into it. And then you think about gerrymandering. They gerrymandered the districts in this state to the point where people don't even have to run against anybody. They're guaranteed to be reelected. You put all that together, and my friends, we're possibly in trouble here. We're one party away from having only one party, and that should scare you. You should be appreciating the fact there are multiple parties on the ballot. We're not saying you have to vote for a Libertarian or a Green Party or any of them, but we need multiple parties, multiple viewpoints, because it's scary if we go to one party. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Turner, my next question is for you. You've been highly critical of the voting schedule advanced by Republicans and administered by Secretary Husted. So what do you see as the ideal schedule? And please be specific. How many days before Election Day should early voting open? How many of those days should include evening hours? And how many weekends should be available?
No, thank you for that question, Henry. Absolutely, I have, because they have been scaling back and creating voter confusion by changing the schedule to the disadvantage of the voter every single election cycle. For me, Henry, I believe that what we had in the state of Ohio prior to the Supreme Court giving Mr. Husted and the Republican legislature a stay was the way to go. Let us not forget what happened in 2004 as to why we got here as a state in the first place. It wasn't out of the goodness of the heart of Republicans. It is because people stood in long lines, and in urban areas in particular, some people were there for hours, and the last voter in Knox County didn't vote until 4 o'clock in the morning. So the Golden Week is vitally important. We need that restored. I would support restoring the Golden Week. It should have never been taken away in the first place. But the Secretary of State has power of directive to set the times and the hours. We need more weekend hours. We need more evening hours so that working class people who want to walk into the polling place and vote should be able to do that. I introduced the Senate Bill 20, which is the Voter Protection Act, that put up guardrails for the citizens of the state of Ohio so that it doesn't matter where they are throughout the state, that they would be guaranteed certain hours, certain weekends, certain evenings, so that they can count on that throughout this election process. That is vitally important, and also to allow boards of elections to go above and beyond that if they can, if they choose, but they would have to vote to do that, the board.
Mr. Nedler, a 30-second response.
I too have a deep concern for a one-size-fits-all the Secretary of State put together. What works in Cuyahoga County sure as heck may not work down in Holmes County or Delaware County where I live, or Union County. It's more rural. I think, though, that if you're going to set hours, maybe the answer is to set a number of hours that they could be open and they could be a little bit flexible. I think there should be some county rights, and I do believe there should be more evening hours for the working people that work till 5 or 6 in the evening.
Thank you very much. Senator Turner, the expanded voting window you champion has been said to favor Democrats, and Mr. Nedler, you have suggested that a big frustration fueling your candidacy is the lack of respect shown for third parties such as yours. So this next question is for both of you. Why should voters trust you to oversee elections in a nonpartisan manner? And Mr. Nedler, I'll start with you.
Well, if there's any seat at the statewide level that frankly should be nonpartisan, it's the Secretary of State's office. There should be zero partisan politics in the Secretary of State's office. Matter of fact, when I'm elected Secretary of State, I will find out if anybody's in that office that's favoring one party at the detriment of another party, and I will be happy to give them a box and show them out the door. I will not tolerate anybody in that Secretary of State's office that's showing favoritism. How they vote is their business, but they need to be, in fairness, they need to be open and fair to all parties, minor and major parties, They need to be open, and they need to realize they work for the citizens, and that elections are extremely important, and they cannot interject partisan politics at any level when they work in the Secretary of State's office.
Senator Turner?
Yeah, and to add to that, you know, the Secretary of State is really the Secretary of Democracy. And no matter what your political affiliation is, when you enter that office, when I enter that office, I will be pro-voter at every turn. And that is, the voters of the state of Ohio can trust me on that. They can check my record. What I've talked about over the years about expanding and protecting access to the ballot box for all voters. The Secretary of State is the umpire of the game. They can't choose a side. And this current Secretary of State has clearly, through his policies and having the Republican General Assembly do his bidding, has chosen his side. And he is not on the people's side. Again, look at his actions and his deeds as Secretary of State. And the last vote that he took, you know, to make sure that his name is prominently displayed in polling places across the state of Ohio, but we could not get him to vote in favor of voters in 2012 to expand early voting, but he sure didn't miss the opportunity in Hamilton County to make sure that his name was proudly displayed. I am pro-voter as the Secretary of State. And that's not necessarily that somebody has to be apolitical. You need somebody that you can trust. So your party affiliation is not the key. It is whether or not you will put the voters at the center of your universe at all times. And that is what I will do as Secretary of State. I've been that kind of champion as a legislator, and I will be even more of a champion as the next Secretary of State.
Online voter registration is an idea that seems to unite the Republican incumbent and you, Senator Turner. Given that Secretary Husted has failed to rally a GOP legislature around this cause, and given that the legislature is likely to remain in GOP hands, how do you feel you, a Democrat, would be any more successful rallying lawmakers around this cause?
Well, Henry, two things. One is I was able to rally my colleagues as a member of a 4-Senate group to create and also pass in the Senate 32-1 redistricting reform, although it didn't make it to the House for debate. That was a pretty important feat. Did that in a bipartisan way, purely bipartisan way, meaning that we started off together in the same room and laid on the table what we could agree with and then convinced our colleagues of the same. In terms of online voter registration, I believe that the Secretary of State right now has the authority. There's a section in the Ohio Revised Code that gives the Secretary of State the ability to allow folks to change their address online. That code is not specific in saying that you cannot allow online voter registration. So as Secretary of State, the next Secretary of State, I'm going to test that out. I am going to allow voters to register online. If he really wanted to do it, he could do it right now.
30-second response from you, Mr. Nedler.
Well, frankly, nearly half the states today have online registration. Why can't Ohio get with it and be on the front end of things instead of always trying to catch up? There's too much of that going on. So I'm totally in favor of online. That's the future. It allows more people with flexible hours and things to register online. They don't necessarily have to go down to the boards. I'm all for it. It's done in half the other states. I wouldn't be surprised in the next few years it'll be nearly all the states. Hopefully Ohio will be one of them.
Thank you. The Secretary of State sits on the Apportionment Board, which draws legislative districts in Ohio, and the incumbent is on record touting a need for redistricting reform. I'm curious, this is a question for both of you, what point of view would you bring to this process, and what specific reforms would you advocate? And I'll start with you, Mr. Nedler.
Well, I appreciate the Ohio Constitutional Modernization Commission is working on that now, and they're trying to put together a panel. I think the flaw in it is that there are not enough independents on there. There are too many current and former people from the Ohio General Assembly on there. Again, half the voters in Ohio are not affiliated with a major party. I think we need more independents. I think that why stop at one minor party? They're talking about one. Okay, so what's the Green Party supposed to do? Are we supposed to flip a coin with the Green Party? I mean, if you have 2 viable or 3 viable minor parties in the state of Ohio and there's thousands of people voting for them, why can't they have a voice in this? So that's where I think we need to adjust it. Allow more minor parties if they're ballot qualified, and allow more independents and frankly people that have not held positions in the Ohio General Assembly. I'm concerned that some of them might be a little too partisan. That's to be seen, but I'm in favor of the commission trying to fix this.
Senator Turner?
Yeah, thank you for that, Henry. And you know, when it comes to redistricting reform, it's a two-step process in the state of Ohio that the that the auditor, the Secretary of State, and the governor, along with legislators, sit on the apportionment board of which the current Secretary of State was on. When he had the opportunity to side with the people with his vote, again, his actions, compared to what he says he wants redistricting reform, but when he had the opportunity to stand up with the people of the state of Ohio, he decided to vote with his party during the reapportionment board process. When we look at reapportionment, the redistricting reform plan that the four senators, state senators, came up with collapse both the apportionment board, which is the drawing of the state lines, and also the drawing of the congressional lines, which are now controlled by the legislature. Put all of that together, have a 7-member board, and make sure that at least one vote of the minority has to be, one vote of the minority has to count in order for that to be able to pass. I agree with Mr. Needler that we need all voices to come to the forefront. It was also my hope that the Modernization Commission would come up with a plan to present it to the legislature, and that the legislature would have the courage to do what is necessary to stop all of this ultra partisanship that is going on in both the legislature and in the Congress. I argue that the state of Ohio is not conservative by desire, it is conservative by design, and the Republicans have rigged the system because they subscribe to the notion that if you can't beat them, you cheat them.
Okay. Senator Turner, you and I have talked about this before, and Secretary Husted is airing a television ad that highlights some of your past financial problems and some issues you had when you were a landlord. I want to give you a chance to respond to that ad and in making up their mind about your candidacy and your credibility as an administrator. How should voters evaluate those past issues?
Well, I'm glad, Henry, that at the City Club, the rules were laid out that personal attacks would not be allowed. There is no room for personal attacks when it comes to seeking office or running for office. I, like many Ohioans, and quite frankly, many people in this great nation, have had some stumbles and some financial struggles along the way in my life. I am not perfect in that regard, that life happens to all of us. But I have been a stellar public servant. I have stood up for the people at all times, working people, poor people, all people. I've stood up for them, and I have a stellar record in that. Mr. Husted decided to go into the gutter because he knows that when voters really truly understand who he is, they will not vote for him. I think all of the voters of the state of Ohio should detest anybody that has to go that low. And it was vicious, it was racist, and it was also sexist, this commercial that Mr. Husted put out against me. I am a public servant of the people, and I will continue to stand up for the folks of the great state of Ohio, being a champion for workers' rights, women's rights, voting rights, the rights that people need to have elected officials fight for. I want people to have opportunities to be able to live their measure of the American dream. And if the folks evaluate my record as an elected official, the choir, the church would have to say amen to that Senator Turner has been a champion for the people.
Senator Turner, just to follow up briefly, you mentioned that you felt the ad was racist. May I ask why?
I did. Anytime you take an African-American candidate or candidate of another ethnicity and you put the beginning of that commercial in black and white, you're sending a message. It's a dog whistle. The types of things that they had to say about me. Listen, every candidate, it is unfortunate that we live in this kind of environment, that every campaign, for the most part, will do opposition research on the person that they're running against instead of focusing in on what is important in this race, which is how will I handle the job? Who do I stand up for? It was sexist in that he used footage of some of my female colleagues in the legislature, snatching pictures from them. He should have had the integrity to stand up on the issues. Everything that I've said about him has been about his performance, either as an elected official in his office and, in the legislature, and also as an office holder as Secretary of State. Even though I got to stack this high of opposition research on Mr. Husted, I have never once used any of that against him personally. It was racist and it was sexist, and I'm so glad that Representative Nikki Antonio, Representative Clyde, and Senator Tavares called him out on his acts. All of us, no matter what our party affiliation is, should not even want to elect somebody that would stoop that low. So I'm calling it the way that I see it. It was deliberate that he would put me in black and white and say the things that he has said, to put in the mind of the voter, to paint me as the other. I am for the people of the state of Ohio.
Thank you. I want to give you a 30-second chance to add anything if you'd like, Mr. Nedler.
Well, obviously, as they say in some of the rural areas, I don't have a dog in this hunt, but I think it was appalling. I agree. It showed, obviously, it showed the character of the Secretary of State when he portrayed that. I saw that, and I had similar thoughts. And I grew up in rural America, and I was brought up by my parents not to treat other people like that. We're all Americans, we're all Ohioans, and we deserve better than to be treated like that. So obviously we now know where the character aspects of our Secretary of State lie, and with that with his party. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Henry, Senator, Chairman. Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we're enjoying a debate between Ohio Secretary of State candidates Kevin Nedler and State Senator Nina Turner, moderated by Henry Gomez. We will return to our speakers momentarily for our traditional City Club question and answer period, and we encourage you to formulate your questions for our speakers now, and we ask that your questions be brief and to the point. We welcome all of you here and those joining us via our live webcast, which is sponsored by the University of Akron. Be sure to tune in to our Friday forums on 90.3 WCPN, WVIZ PBS 104.9, WCLV Idea Stream, or one of the many other radio stations across the region and country that carry City Club programs. Television broadcasts of the City Club are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC. This Friday, October 31st, the City Club will host a panel conversation entitled Turning the Tide on Sexual Abuse. For more information about our upcoming and past forums, please visit us online at cityclub.org. Today's debate is sponsored by the Northeast Ohio Media Group, the City Club's sponsor of politics and policy programming. We thank you very much for your support. And today we welcome guests at tables hosted by the Cuyahoga County Democratic Party, the Cuyahoga Democratic Party Women's Caucus, Nedler for Secretary of State, and Nina Turner for Secretary of State. We thank you all for your attendance and your support. We also welcome students to today's debate. Joining us are students from Baldwin Wallace University's Scholars Program and Shaw High School. Could the students please stand to be recognized?
There we go.
We look forward to your questions, as well as the rest of you, but these guys are much more important, frankly. Student participation is made possible by a generous grant from the Development Pipeline Company. We thank you very much for your support. Now, it's time for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests and students. Holding our microphone today is our Marketing and Outreach Specialist, Kirsten Pianka. Do we have our first question, please? Thank you.
Thank you. We have heard, I've heard from a couple of the candidates from this forum in the past that have made comments that, gee, you know, when I was a kid, you know, my parents, in 1954, you know, my parents were able to vote on same-day voting and only one day of voting. So it may sound rhetorical, but what do you suppose has changed since 1954 and 2014? And I'll direct it, obviously, to both candidates.
Well, my first time I voted was in 1972, and the population, I think, was like 150 million people. What is it now, 350 million people? Try to triple the number of people voting or more in the same amount of hours. So, and plus this is an electronic age. Things are moving quickly. Things change. The bottom line is and hours change. We don't all work 7 to 4 or 8 to 5. There's all kind of different hours. There's different lifestyles. This isn't all Ozzie and Harriet anymore, my friends.
Right. That's right.
Which was what the 50s and early 60s was. I remember that show. Things have changed, and they've changed for the better, and we need to be flexible to all Americans, not just a segment of them. That's my response.
Yeah, and I mean, I agree with Mr. Nedler. He summed it up. Times have changed, and you know, we have a lot of folks have to work 2-3 jobs. They might not necessarily be able to make it to the polling place, to the centrally located polling place during early voting. during the business hours. So it's not fair. There are a lot of single parent households as well. And so when people have to choose between picking up their children from daycare and going to vote, that is something that they should not have to. We should use the technology and the knowledge that we have as a society to expand and protect access to the ballot box for all people. And you know, I think Dr. King said it best when he said what affects one directly affects us all indirectly. And so when we got working class folks or people who are economically challenged having a harder time getting to the polling place, why wouldn't we as a society make sure that we expand that access? That is what the state of Ohio had been doing up until recently, when the Republicans have decided that not only don't they want certain people going to vote, they don't want certain political parties even on the ballot.
Don't get me started.
You know, something is wrong with that.
You got an hour?
Right. So Chairman, I mean, just to surmise that we live in a more modern time, a different time. We have more knowledge at our disposal. And if we want more people to participate in the process, as we should definitely make sure that we do those things from a policy perspective that creates those avenues of access.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Interesting discussion. And we know that after that fiasco of 2004, when people couldn't vote because there just weren't enough polling places, we saw the liberalization of voting.
Yeah.
And then after the massive turnout of new voters and new Democratic voters in 2008, we've seen over 20 states across the country cut back on that liberalization. What I'm wondering is, we're hearing all about the current Secretary of State as being responsible for all this, but in view of the fact that this has happened in Republican states across the country, is this some kind of a national effort as opposed to simply the personality of our Secretary of State?
Oh, thank you, Henry. Absolutely, Mr. Perry. This is a national effort. I mean, you look at states like Texas and North Carolina and Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, you name it, they are doing it. This is a strategic effort by the Republican Party. This is not by accident. And that is really what I want the voters of the great state of Ohio to understand, and our sisters and brothers across the country, that this democracy is greater the more people who participate, but we cannot turn a blind eye to the folks who are using their political might, which belongs to the people, I might add, to stop certain groups of people from being able to vote. This is not happening by accident. So our current Secretary of State is doing it in his capacity. We have the Republican-dominated legislature doing his bidding through enacting laws. It was a law that took away Golden Week. It was a law now that the legislature passed, the Republicans passed, to not allow any boards of elections to mail out unsolicited absentee ballot applications. One of the reasons why we had Golden Week in this great state and to be able to give boards of elections that flexibility is to your point about what happened in 2004, so that people are not standing in line all day long to try to be able to vote. It was to reduce the pressure on election day. So this is strategic, but the whole notion of the people, by the people, and for the people can stop it. And the way we stop it is by electing elected officials to all offices that believe that elections should be expanded and protected.
Thank you. Mr. Nedler?
I mentioned earlier the bag of tricks from the Republican Party. They just can't help themselves. It's Halloween. They're masquerading out there, and I'm sure that they're down there right now plotting to give us more voter freedom. I'm sure those Republicans really like to do that, don't they, my friends? Well, I'm here to tell you they aren't. It is a plot playing out against the Libertarian Party specifically in the state of New York, Illinois, Kentucky. Michigan, they played it out. Ohio, they're trying to destroy us. It's all over the country. They believe in freedom of saying what you want as long as it's what they want you to say. So it's not just voter freedom, it's political party freedom. I'm back to saying we're one party away from having one party. This has got to stop. This nonsense has got to stop. We need everybody to vote. I'm not telling you how to vote. Obviously, I wish you'd vote one way. But you've got to realize that the bag of tricks out there is beyond just Ohio. I think they're sharing a lot of notes myself.
Oh, yeah. Amen.
Good afternoon, Mr. Nedler and Senator Turner. Thank you for having me. My name is Anthony Price. I'm a junior at Shaw High School. And my question is, I know the importance of voting. I wish I could vote for this midterm election, but I'm a junior. So my senior year, I'll have the opportunity to vote for the presidential election next year. So my question is, as Secretary of State, how do you plan on reaching out or implementing the importance of voting to those that will be graduating in the coming years as far as the presidential election?
Well,
We'll do this first.
Why don't you start?
okay.
Okay. Well, one of the things I've talked about before is that I think we need to realize the millenniums are coming, and your communication vehicles are different than mine. I still read the newspaper. You know, I grew up with black and white television, let's face it. The point is, we need in the Secretary of State's office to address social media, and I would have a point person that would do more social media to reach out to you. Definitely, the Secretary of State and myself, obviously, would go out and speak at colleges and universities much more. Some of the staff would, to bring you up to not only voting, but some of the past issues we've had with voting, because we can't let this repeat itself. We can't just ignore what's been going on in this state. We have to pass on the message of freedom and voting suffrage. A quick story. My grandmother told me the story when she was about 1912, 1913. She told me the story about women marching in the streets with dresses and parasols and signs, and she was like 12 years old. You know what they were doing? They were marching in the streets for the freedom to vote. Women have not had the right to vote for, well, it's been under 100 years. So I'm conscious of all these things, and we need to go out and do more social media, more speaking events, and reach out to the millenniums. And that's what I would really, really push hard.
And to add to that, Anthony, because I agree with everything that Mr. Needler had to say, you know, I have a bill pending right now in the legislature to pre-register 16 and 17-year-olds. You know, we bemoan the fact that we only have 17% voter turnout in this last election, for example. What better way to get our young people engaged and engaged at a young age than to pre-register them? You know, the Pew Center did a study that shows that the earlier we engage young people, the more likelihood that they will vote or participate in the process over their lifetime. The greatest way to grow voters, so to speak, is to make sure that we catch you while you are young. And we need to have a civic dialogue in this state about the importance of voting and the importance of engagement. I mean, not only the women's suffrage, but even young people at a period of time in this country. We had to change the age to make sure your future is today. And those of us who are running for office, those of us who hold office, the things that we do through public policy impact you right now. So it is vitally important that we engage you in the process. My husband and I, we've been taking our son to vote with us since, well, really since he was in the womb, of course. But when he became even an arm baby, you know, we took him with us. And to this day, we still vote as a family because voting is important. And again, the more people who participate in this great democracy, the stronger and the better it is. And to see Shaw High School students here and our BW scholars gives me great hope for the future.
I have noticed that Secretary of State Husted, in every speaking engagement, in every media appearance, he has a slogan, and it was mentioned earlier, and please correct me if I have it wrong, that his goal is to make it easy to vote and hard to cheat. Yeah. Now, by saying that slogan over and over and over again, it gives the impression that there is a lot of cheating in voting. And I would like to have both of your impressions of that.
Senator Turner?
Well, you know, again, it's a dog whistle. It really is scaring people in this state. Our voting, the integrity of our election system in this state is strong. 3.5 years in prison and a $10,000 fine if you are caught cheating. It is not worth it. And by the current Secretary of State's own report that he put out, less than 1% of 1% voter fraud in the state of Ohio. So again, he's not making it easy to vote. He's making it harder to vote. But I do want everybody to understand that in the state of Ohio, voter fraud is almost non-existent, and if and where it does exist, we have laws on the books. Instead of that, we should be expanding the franchise, and he is not doing that. The Brennan Center said that you have a greater likelihood of being struck by lightning than you do for somebody to try to impersonate you at the ballot box. You know, Mr. Husted is a nice man, but this is not the job for him. He doesn't really want to be Secretary of State, because if he did, he would be expanding and protecting access to the ballot box. He wants to use this office for partisan gain, so he should go back to the legislature or run for governor, as he has alluded to. But he certainly does not want to be Secretary of State. I do, and that is why I'm running for this office.
There have been numbers of studies in this state addressing voter fraud, and they found that it's minimal, if non-existent. It's basically the bugle call from the Republican Party to drive up their base and get them excited. That's all there is to it. I would be more concerned about looking into some of the electronic voting machines, where Diebold, Premier, any of those companies, look in, make sure that nobody can mess with the numbers in the electronic voting. That's probably where I'm more concerned versus fraud.
Good afternoon. My name is Eric Bray. My question for both candidates is, what are the duties of a Secretary of State?
That's a very good question, Eric.
Why don't we start with you?
Well, the duties are the chief elections official, working with the Board of Elections, also managing LLC registrations, new business corporations that want to come into Ohio, making sure they're registered and they fill out paperwork, helping give some parameters to notary publics, although that's handled more at the county level. But the chief elections, unfortunately, is the main thing. We have so many issues in the state. I wish we could work more on bringing more business and helping them get registered, LLCs and corporations, but we have so many issues in this state about elections, unfortunately. That's primarily where the Secretary of State will spend their time.
Mm-hmm. True. And Eric, just to add to that, on the business side, the business services side, which we don't hear a whole lot about because of the voting space, but I believe that there are premium opportunities in that space to take that office from just an office where corporations, LLCs, nonprofits fill out paperwork, to a space where that office is the bridge to opportunities for entrepreneurs, for businesses, to link them to financing, to link them to trade organizations, to link them to other businesses within their supply chain. You know, we have not recovered from the Great Recession in this state. We're still about 100,000 jobs below where we should be. And although there have been record business filings, there has not been record job creation. I want to see the Business Services Division of the Secretary of State be a true partner in not only helping people to start their businesses, but to help them be able to create jobs. Because when people have good jobs, because folks don't get up for decent, people get up for good and for great. But when people have good jobs and we have thriving companies in the state of Ohio, the quality of life for all people is stronger and better. And I want to see the Secretary of State's office play a stronger role in that regard. Opportunities at the ballot box, opportunities in business, and opportunities beyond. And thank you, Eric. That was a great question.
Good afternoon, Gigi Trayor. And that was a great question to bridge into what I was going to bring up in terms of the Secretary of State, to speak about the business processes within your role, in terms of having to do the double or triple reporting, one to the Attorney General's office or to the federal government. How would you, as Secretary of State, make that easier for businesses to not have to do those double and triple reportings?
Well, Gigi, in terms of the different reporting mechanisms across offices, I can't speak for those other offices, but I certainly, as Secretary of State, would be very open to how we decrease the paperwork for folks. Not only do businesses have to fill out paperwork, nonprofits do too. On the candidate side, you certainly do have to fill out the paperwork. I want to make sure, though, there are about 119 or so give or take forms for the Secretary of State's office. The vast majority of those forms are not available online, and I want us to use the technology to bring more of those forms online unless there's some rationale that's explicit that we should not do so. Again, using the technology to empower, it makes it more efficient, it cuts down on costs, and it gives folks an opportunity, because let's face it, most people start a business, they're already working another job. I mean, I had the opportunity to meet a young lady by the name of Kelly, who owns Signature Wines, and she worked a full-time job for the first 5 to 7 years while she was trying to create her own business. She was up at 2 o'clock in the morning trying to create that business. Wouldn't it be nice in the Secretary of State's office if you had, on the Business Services Division side, non-traditional hours, the same way we want voters to be able to have that access, to be able to provide that access. I want to create a chat line for business owners to be able to talk to the Secretary of State's personnel and, again, create that access so that they will have the tools that they need to succeed.
Mr. Nedler?
I'm going to echo Senator Turner again. Online voting is an example where we need to catch up. Obviously, we need to catch up here also. There's too many forms that should be online, as was said. Some of this is duplication. I have a friend that is starting a new business, and he was telling me about some issues in his, it's an automotive business, about trying to get established and some of the confusion. I think there needs to be more training. I think there needs to be more online training, maybe even webinars. But we've got to do a better job. We want businesses to come to Ohio. We don't want them going to Indiana. Although I love Indiana, we need to keep them here in Ohio. And we need to do everything possible to make it easy to establish a business, an LLC in this state, and especially the small business owners, because typically they're family owned and they'll pass the business on to their children and their children. It's generational. And I have a lot of experience in that. And that means there will be a continuity of that business, but we need to make it easy for them to get started.
Time-wise, when you're having fun, I've been told it's time for the last question. Each of you will have 3 minutes to answer. I'm sure that both of you will commit to being here in 4 years as an incumbent to debate your opponents.
Yes.
So,
Yes, guaranteed.
assuming that what these days is a lofty premise, say you are here 4 years from now, participating in a debate, asking voters for a second term as Secretary of State, what will we hear from you about the strides the office has made under your leadership? What do you anticipate will be the selling point for your reelection? And because of the coin toss, Senator Turner, you will go first.
Oh, thank you, Henry, for that. And again, it was such a pleasure to engage in this debate, and glad that Mr. Needler and I had the courage to face the voters of the great state of Ohio. For me, I want to be able to say to the voters that I continuously expanded and protected access to the ballot box. One of my goals is to seek out 100% voter participation. I am shooting beyond the stars in that. We have almost 8 million registered voters in the great state of Ohio, and I want to go after every single one of them in a way that reminds them that the people's power, your voice is articulated, your vision is articulated through the power of the vote, and that every single year there's a person or an issue on the ballot and you can't be on the sidelines, that your voice is important. I want to civically engage, have a big statewide dialogue about what does it mean to vote in a primary. I hate to tell you, a lot of people don't know the difference between a primary and a general election. This year, unfortunately, a lot of folks didn't even know that there was a primary. Elected officials, but primarily the Secretary of State, we can do a better job of making sure that we sound the alarm to the voters of the state of Ohio that that they have to vote, that they must vote. And so I want to do that. Pre-registering 16 and 17-year-olds, my goal to convince the legislature that that is worthy. I will have online voter registration because the Secretary of State can currently do that right now. That would decrease paperwork, it would make the office more efficient, and it would save money. And then linking that access from the ballot box to the business, increasing the opportunities within the business services division so that businesses know that the Secretary of State office will be their bridge, that we are there for them if they have questions or they have needs or they need to be linked to services that they might not know what direction to go in. I go back to what President Lyndon B. Johnson said, that the vote is the greatest foundational point that we have, that there is a correlation between the ballot box and the bread box. I want to see a headline in the Cleveland Plain Dealer that says Ohio is the gold standard of voting. And as the next chief elections officer, I am going to use the full force and weight of that office to make sure that voters know that. I am going to partner with not only with businesses but with publications to bring sexy back to voting, if I can just put it that way. I want people to be excited about voting. I want voters to be able to say that Senator Turner delivered on her promise, which is to make sure that voters are at the center of her universe. That is why I'm running for Secretary of State.
Mr. Nedler?
I had the battle scars already working for ballot access. And again, you may not necessarily agree with some of the stances of the Libertarian Party, but we're talking about basic suffrage. So I've been in the trenches fighting, mostly against Republicans, of course, for the last 8, 9 years, and I have had my eyes opened widely. There needs to be a lot of things changed in this state, and hopefully in 4 years I could say, my checkoff list, Business Services Division, online, it's in the 21st century technology. It actually encourages people to want to open up a business in Ohio. Same thing with online voting. We need to be on the forefront of that. Again, it's ridiculous that we're following other states. I have a vision, frankly, and a hope and a desire that someday you'll be able to go in and vote for whoever you want. You won't have to feel suppressed, especially at a time when our troops are in countries like Afghanistan and Iraq, and they have multiple parties. I just read the other day about the Ukraine. They have 6 or 7 parties. They seem to be functioning just well. Even my beloved UK, I'm half English, they have multiple parties forming now. It's not just the 2. Things are changing. Canada's changing, multiple parties. Wouldn't it be wonderful if you could have more candidates? You might have more excitement in the media. The bottom line is we need to protect our precious voter freedoms, and I would take to the bully pulpit, as I said, and make sure you have choices. After all, in our everyday consumer lives, we have choices, don't we? Whether we go to a hardware store or a Home Depot, whether we buy a Ford or a Honda, whether we buy a red car, a blue car, or maybe that purple car. But can you imagine if we let this continue and the government says, sorry, you can only buy one kind of car. You can only go to one kind of store. There's a word for that, and it's not good. And that's why I want to be passionately involved as Secretary of State. I'm very qualified to do this. I have the battle scars, as I said, and in 4 years, I hope we can check off a lot of things on that list and make this a better state for voter freedom. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, Henry Gomez, Senator Turner, Chairman Nedler, thank you very much. Henry, thank you for bringing sexy back. Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we've been enjoying a debate between Ohio Secretary of State candidates Kevin Nedler and State Senator Nina Turner, moderated by Henry Gomez of the Northeast Ohio Media Group. Thank you all so much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Students especially, thank you. We look forward to seeing you at the ballot box as soon as it's legal. And ladies and gentlemen, our forum is adjourned.